Hi, this is Ron Babich again from Hard Dollar here in Scottsdale, Arizona, where the weather is delightful this week at 110, 115, not sure, but it's getting very hot. So hopefully wherever you're at, the weather's awesome. We're going to go ahead and get started here in just a minute. Again, we kind of do these workshops once a month. Usually we will pick a different vertical. Last month, I believe, we did our mining update workshop, which was really well attended. They always seem to be beneficial, not just from a kind of a information sharing for best practices, but also gathering data from the people that are on the call and kind of sharing ideas, much like a forum, where some of the processes that are driven from the actual business are kind of put into a discussion so that we can identify how other people are doing things, and then we kind of focus on making improvements on the process side and on the workflow side so that we can kind of best utilize the tools that we have in front of us, and then our workflows in general. So it's one of my favorite things each month is doing these things, because we get the chance to really kind of join together as a community, and the turnouts are always pretty good. So we'll go ahead and get started. My name's Ron Babich with Hard Dollar, and I appreciate you guys joining us today for this online workshop. The way that we're going to lay this out is a couple things. We're going to go through some statistical data, some slides that kind of like set the stage for some of the business issues that we're going to see within the product, and kind of show how we solve these things with the product, and also talk about some of the industry standard information that we've gathered collectively, some watermark information as well. And joining me today, who is going to actually go through the product with us and share a lot of insight also in a lot of those details, is Justin Murphy. Justin's one of our senior engineers here at Hard Dollar. And Justin's going to help us kind of walk through those business processes, as well as flip into the product at the end of it and kind of show how we deal with things as well. Not to say that you have to have Hard Dollar to deal with some of these things, but your life would be a lot better if you did. So I'll go ahead and get started and go into the first slide. And let's talk about really the kind of the cost of change and the market demand behind it. So really what we're talking about today is outside and inside influences around cost and productivity that we have control over on the engineering side, and some of them are economic, which we have very little or no control over. And the idea behind today's session is to kind of break down the engineering things and break down the economic things so that we can potentially make some improvements and get some better accuracy around our cost data, not just from an estimating side, but also from the progress side as well. So let's go to the next slide. So a couple things here that I wanted to share from a energy perspective. There's really strong evidence on and a lot of support for oil and gas projects by multiple studies that are out there that I've actually included in the slide deck as well too, with some links. So again, if you're interested at the end, I'm happy to send you the links for this stuff so you can go look up some historic information. But strong evidence on the project side that has little impact on overrun probability. So basically, in many cases, the larger the project doesn't necessarily mean that it has a larger impact percentage-wise on overruns and underruns. It's about the same. Oil and gas has a little bit more diversity when it comes to big and large projects. Mining, the mining study with the 46 or 47 projects for that 20-year study we did last month had kind of a greater impact. But we're going to get into some of the specifics about that and why we think that is, and then what we can do to actually fix it. In this particular case, the Gypton study down below, 46 projects, 21 exceeding 15% overruns. On average, the average overrun for those 46 projects were 25% overrun. But after you take inflation out of the mix and just kind of focus on the non-economic factors, just pure engineering, you're looking at an average of 14%. Again, if you're interested in some of those links too, to kind of look up some of that data, which I think is pretty neat to look at, that's in the slide deck. So 14% after inflation, 25% overall. So you can see even the spread on that, there's some serious economic conditions that are kind of outside of the scope of being able to control, and how much that impacted those projects over time. And then we go to the next slide. This kind of shows a a little bit greater diversity on, and these are specific oil and gas projects, percentage of projects exceeding budget and cycle time by more than 10%. And you look at the mega projects in red versus the other projects exceeding budget, and it's obvious from the graph that from a budget perspective, yes, the mega projects exceed slightly over on budget, and they also exceed on cycle time. Not hugely different, but they do have a greater impact overall. We'll go to the next slide. So at the end of the day, if we start breaking down just some of the internal engineering side things, like on the project where we talk about resources, estimating labor, accounting for materials, accounting for equipment, accounting for overhead, all the kind of the cost items and productivity that we can ascertain on the engineering side versus the stuff we have a hard time controlling, but we may be able to get our hands on a little bit better, labor shortages, shareholder expectations with additional cash that we didn't have before, but now it's going to be put in place, supply and demand, leveraging for materials, again, weather conditions, and then government policy. Today's session is kind of all about when we have changes that are external, how do we kind of account for those things on the indirect side and other areas to make adjustments so that we're better at doing our job. Next slide. So this just kind of breaks that down. So on the internal forecast, you know, from a definitive perspective, and depending on where you're at with your industry and with your organization, you know, it's quite typical that we want to be at a placement of 5 to 10% on our control budgets and our definitive estimates, right, from where we're measuring from. But unfortunately, just like in this last slide that I kind of presented a few slides ago, there's an additional 10% of outside regional geographic conditions. So even if we are masters of the universe at norms data and figure this stuff out on the left-hand side, there's still a bunch of things that are geographic, that are regional, that are outside conditions that have a play into the project that have an ultimate impact over the overall cost or the timeline. So hopefully, again, today we're going to point out some things that can help us get a handle on that and lower that number on the right quite a bit as far as predictability, and then keep things in line a little bit tighter on the left-hand side too. So we'll go to the next slide. Here we're just talking about, I want to give a couple examples of things that have happened externally that made some changes internally, so I'm not going to go through all this, but even on the political side, protesting and strikes, the impact that has on labor shortages, and then tying that in from a productivity perspective and a labor availability perspective within the control budget, within the estimate, and how we predict and forecast our progress. We'll go to the next slide. So project planning, 16% escalation factor to 1/3 of the labor. So here we're talking about accounting for a 16% escalation factor. This in particular case is in South Africa over time because of the 1/3 reduction in the labor force and being able to plan for that. But we're going to go through some examples today that will account for changes in the schedule, changes in productivity, or changes in resources that are going to have an impact on our cost and our productivity. Go to the next slide. And so this is a great slide that kind of breaks down the Remy Erickson study on projects. So new rig projects, average cost to overrun in the study, 35% over, average delay 7 months from plan, floating production storage and off-loading projects, average cost to overrun was 20 to 30%, and then of course long-term consequential effects. So once again, that's all fine and dandy, but like how do we understand if there's such a big problem? How do we get our hands around this a little bit better so we can reduce that number and not have these excessive overruns? So we do that by starting to remove some of the roadblocks. And this doesn't fix the problem, but it starts knocking them down one by one, which is number one, delaying reporting data, getting greater visibility between the yellow boxes on the left-hand side so that the owner, EPCM, and contractor have greater visibility, and there's not a delay in reporting between them. Two is the inaccuracy of data, getting that kind of removed as well too, so that we're reporting accurate data from the field as quickly as we possibly can against a control budget of sorts so that we can understand where we are really at versus where we think we're at. The third one is removing the summary / detail of this misaligned data where on the ERP side, I'm pretty happy with the data because it's my system of record and cost, but on the operational side and project delivery side, the details are far more greater than I've got on the ERP side. So I've got this misalignment there, and how do I line that up? And then lastly, really kind of filling the void of getting the ERP side filled in with productivity and earned value information from the project delivery system so that we're feeding that in there. And then we'll go to the next slide. And so how we're going to do that today, we're going to focus on really two things, but one is in tying it into the blue boxes. So hard dollar is the yellow boxes there. Hard dollar provides the estimating functionality, the yellow box, the progress functionality, which is also the yellow box, and then we kind of tie those things into our project cost management platform there on the bottom, and using that API, tying into the design system for quantities, tying it into the schedule, which we're going to look at a lot today with Primavera and Microsoft Project, and then finally really tying it into the finance system, systems like SAP and JD Edwards and Oracle Finance, where we're actually pushing those budget numbers over, pulling those actuals as built back into hard dollar. Here I kind of got this is a lot of information on the slide, but if you kind of focus right on the middle of the slide, which is basically where we kind of come in, the project delivery data, the estimate, and the project controls for progress, we're bridging that gap between the systems of record. The schedule on the left-hand side is the system of record. It's not going anywhere, providing all the start and finish dates. The ERP system that we depend on is the system of record with all of its information as well, too. And then you've got the project delivery system in the middle, which is hard dollar, creating the estimate, modifying the control budget estimate, and then measuring progress on the bottom there. So that absence of that centerpiece is what we're going to drive on today. We'll go to the next slide. So what we're going to do, we're going to do a couple things. One, hopefully we'll eliminate internal speculation by a consistent method of delivery. We're going to report on the summary, but we're going to record and capture detail to fix the other roadblock. Open progress to the vendor input on measurements so that we can have contract. If I'm an owner, I'm opening it up to contractors so that they can contribute to us what those progress is. If I'm a contractor, I have an outlet so that I can actually do that and give visibility to the owner. Leverage the schedule, which is a key piece of the piece that we're going to go through today. And then best practice, standardizing the work breakdown structure so that we're good across the board throughout the systems of record. And that's one of the cool things I think we're going to do today into the scheduling system as well as into the ERP system. You'll see a little bit of how we standardize that. And then next slide is basically, years ago it was really just about focusing on the estimator and on project controls. But today, the visibility is across the board. It's to the controller, to the CFO, to all the financial people working in the project, along with procurement, along with scheduler and planners, along with alternate roles at the organization. So that cost and productivity data at the center of this has to be exposed to all those different people. And I think that it's not a selfish type of thing, but it has to be very unselfish in the way that we provide data nowadays, because those things have an impact on cash flow analysis, on our procurement hedging, for schedulers and planners to understand how the estimator actually did the work and expose that data across the board. I'll go to the next slide. So what we're going to do today is we're going to do three things to support that. Number one, we're going to standardize the norms for consistency. So we're going to look at a way for if you're a guy in Miami, you're doing the same type of work as the person that's in Australia or in India, but we're going to come up with the same answer because we're going to draw from a standardized norms database for consistency for this oil and gas project. Second thing we're going to do is we're going to deal with the problem of how do we deal with economic factors that are driven date changes, and those date changes drive my indirects to modify, and I'm trying to make the least amount of work for myself. So what we're going to see here today is how those dates affect those indirects and how they drive that number up and down. Third one is maintaining independent schedule, a WBS and a CBS, but having a connection between them so that we can actually have a tie and we fix that disparity issue that we talked about on the other slide. So we're going to focus on those three things today and kind of show you how we're doing it to make those connections. And I'll turn it over to Justin. Justin, it's all you.
Great, thanks, Ron. So for this first scenario, we're going to focus in on leveraging norms data. And what I'm going to do is jump over into hard dollar, and we're looking at a sample process pipe job. Right now I have the entire job rolled up at a level 1 summary. And for this first walkthrough, I'm just going to focus in on this process piping section. So as I expand out that level 4 item, we can see the process piping breaks down into 15 subtasks, from handling spools down to socket welds. Now, let's say I'm finalizing my estimate for this particular section of work, and I need to account for some pressure tests, and I want to leverage the norms data that I have for my company to accommodate for man hours and man hour factors and drive an overall cost. So in order to do that, I'm just going to have my cursor on this process piping item, and I'm going to go into my norms data. And you'll see that the norms integration window is loaded. I'm currently on the mechanics trade. I'm looking at piping. I'm looking at all components. And on the left side on my navigation tree, I have all my different pressure tests. So I'm going to just focus in on this particular pressure test and look at all the different norms items I have that I can leverage to drive new cost. So I'm just going to randomly select a couple items, maybe this 1 inch and this 2 inch, add it into my queue, where it's already has that historic information on the hours. I'm going to specify some quantities, maybe 500 for this one and 750 for the second. Maybe apply some difficulty factors to it. Maybe we're working below ground on both of these. And now I essentially have accounted for these two items in my new estimate, leveraging historical information. When I click the Apply button, those items will be added to my estimate. I go back, we'll see items 16 and 17 have been added under Process Piping. And just to confirm, I'm going to quickly bring in another column to confirm that it is coming from norms. So what I did is dropped in a data source column. You'll notice that it has the tag field of norms associated with it. So if you're an estimator and someone asked you, where did you get that number from, you can say you leveraged it from your norms database. And then from there, we can go in and actually inspect the individual record and see how that cost is being driven. So that norms database is leveraging a pipe fitter assembly. It had the productivity measurements already in there. So essentially you're doing 266 feet per day. The total duration with the man-hour factors added onto it is going to be just under 4 days. So the whole point of this is to leverage your historic information, leverage your norms data to help streamline your project, streamline your estimates, and have some standardization as far as the breakdowns.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think just one final note on that is just the standardization is key here, so that we have a standard process and it's predictable, as we kind of mentioned in the slides before. Whether it's a location that's here, whether it's 2,000 miles away, we're doing it the exact same way, but then adding the factors of the geography to it, the region to it. So kind of getting the best of both worlds. Centralized process, but adding the factors of wherever you happen to be in life with where you're actually doing the work.
Yeah, and just to add to that, going back into that cost item record, we can see the man-hour factor that was applied to this particular cost item that we brought in from norms. So to account for those geographic or regional costs, we could simply change our composite factor right here based on those conditions, either at a item-by-item level or kind of at a global level.
Yeah, and the cool part about that is, too, we won't show it today, but now you could actually take that data and parlay that into measuring the progress right on top of it. So it just goes from one thing to the next, having the norms, building the cost model, measuring the progress, and then pulling that right into the ERP system, kind of actually having the slides there too. So it's just, there's a seamless process from the beginning to the end.
All right. For the next scenario, we're going to see how we can dynamically generate the indirect cost. And what I mean by that is if I kind of analyze my current estimate, I'm essentially accounting for direct cost. There's no supervision or kind of a project management anywhere in my job right now. And what I do have is a placeholder for that. And it's this dependent cost item at the top of my estimate or my CBS called Job Management and Equipment. If I go into this particular record, you can see that I have a project manager and an operating engineer assigned, but there's no cost in it right now. What I want to do is have the cost for these two resources driven by the schedule. So depending on how long my project's going to be, I want that duration to lead or to generate the cost of both the project manager and operating engineer. In order to do that, we need to rely on our integrations with scheduling applications like Primavera and Microsoft Project. So real quickly, I'm just going to switch my view here to my scheduling view. And I've already scheduled this cost breakdown structure. So a very similar structure will reside on Primavera when we switch to it. And I have essentially have specified a roll up to a level 3. So there are some items in this estimate that go down to a level 4 or level 5. I have chosen to roll up everything to a level 3, or level 3 activity. So when I jump over to Primavera, we'll see a very similar structure. Right? There's my level 2 items from the civil down to the transmission line. I look at that process piping. There's all my level 3 activities. So right now I want to focus in on that job management and equipment item. So as I showed on the estimate, there's currently 0 duration and cost being generated. Well, I want the cost on the hard dollar side again to be driven by the schedule. So however long the job is how long we need to pay that project manager and operating engineer. So the first thing I'm going to do on the Primavera side is establish some relationships. So for my predecessor, I'm going to pick this very first activity under civil and add that as a predecessor relationship. And for my successor, I'm going to select the last activity in my schedule. And now I'm going to kind of adjust the relationships. For that predecessor, I'm going to make it a start-to-start relationship. And for my successor, a finish-to-finish. And the last thing I need to do for this job management activity is switch it from a task dependent to a level of effort. Right? So we've accounted for that, but now we need to essentially put in the logic into the schedule. And I'm just going to kind of cheat here a little bit and highlight all these activities and create a finish-to-start relationship. This is probably not how you're going to do it, but for today's scenario, this is how I am. So I'm going to quickly schedule this, and instantly we have a new schedule with start and finish dates, as I can easily scroll up and see, going to the very top. But more importantly is that first item for job management and equipment now has a duration assigned to it that's contingent on the schedule. We're going to start paying that project manager and operating engineer when this CAPS item starts. It's going to end when we finish that concrete foundation. Right? So now that we have the schedule and P6 in place, now we can go back into hard dollar and actually see cost be generated on this job and management equipment item. So what I'm going to do is bring in a cost column into my view here. And see right now we're at 0. Well, I'm going to update hard dollar with all the start and finish dates that we just created in Primavera. And we should see that total forecast cost update, which it has. So based on a duration of almost 540 days for that kind of ad hoc schedule I put together, it's generating almost $750,000 in essentially job overhead costs associated with that project manager and operating engineer. If I go into the actual record, we can see now that there's a schedule assigned to this activity. It brought in those that total duration, essentially 540 days. It backfilled in what the total hours that project manager and operating engineer are going to work. But more importantly, it calculated what essentially that total cost is. So almost $500,000 is going to that manager. Another, $250,000 and change to the operating engineer.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. I mean, it's a super strong way to deal with the weekly changes that are taking place on the schedule, so that anything that's related from a supervisory, and this is just one example, but from a supervisory perspective, where the time's going to fluctuate based on that schedule. Of course, those costs are going to go along with it. but this eliminates kind of all the math of trying to figure that out as changes every week.
Yeah. All right, so that covers the second one. So dynamically generating those indirect costs. The last one, and it's one that we commonly get, is, you know, we're looking at this cost breakdown structure in hard dollar, you know, and we're, as I just showed you, we can easily create the work breakdown structure in Primavera. You know, the comment we sometimes get is, well, that's not how I'm going to schedule my job, or that's not how I'm going to execute my job, and that essentially that work breakdown structure isn't how we're going to do it. And so, you know, what are some ways that we can address that? You have all the activities on your estimate. You know, right now looking at, you know, civil, structural steel, underground pipe, process piping, you know, everything's organized on your estimate, but from a scheduling perspective and execution perspective, you might have to display it in a way that's more relevant to you. And how can we do that? Well, one is by associating these items with tags in hard dollar. And as an example, I've assigned some of these areas, some of these cost items to a different area, to a different division, and assigned a priority to each. Right? So each activity in my estimate is now assigned an area, a priority, and a division. And what this allows me to do is to rearrange my estimated items based on these tags in Primavera. These tags can both be assigned to user-defined fields or activity codes if you have them pre-set up. So if I go into Primavera, again, if I kind of scroll to the very top, I'm looking at almost the exact same structure that I have in hard dollar, that cost breakdown. And what I want to do is kind of rearrange it based on my area, my division, and my priority. So what I'm going to do real quick is switch to my group and sort and actually bring in those variables. Let me bring in my area, let me bring in my division, and we bring in my priority. And let's look at this, these activities a different way. So right now, I have 4 major groupings, area 1, 2, and 3, and some activities that haven't been assigned, right? So I can kind of expand this out and see the 5 activities that don't have an area or division or priority assignment to them. And I can easily tell that these are all the transmission items from my estimate, as well as that job management and equipment item that we just demonstrated. So that might be a note to the estimator or the planner to, hey, we need to classify these items before we schedule them. But just going back up to area 1, you know, we can see that there's items assigned to both civil and steel. You know, expanding those out, we can see the priorities that have been established to some of these activities. And as I expand out that P1 priority, we have, you know, essentially 4 items in the estimate that have been assigned that tag. So again, this is just another way of using information from the estimate, assigning variables that are more relevant on the scheduling side, allowing you to create your own, essentially your own custom work breakdown structure.
Okay, awesome. You know, I was going to open it up to questions. Okay. Normally we would do it through, I think, chat as well, and we try to keep the audio muted through the whole thing because in case there's any dogs barking. Not that there's wrong with dogs because we love dogs, but if there's any dogs barking in the background or anything like that. But we open up the audio at the end. I did get some chat questions throughout, so I'm going to go ahead and kind of read the ones that we've got. And then if you have any questions, now's the time for us to kind of explore those things. Number 1 was, you demonstrated the scheduling integration with Primavera today. Does Hard Dollar integrate with MS Project as well? Justin.
Yes, it does.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for that elongated answer.
Yeah. So Primavera, P6, Microsoft Project, as well as you could do essentially manual entries. So maybe you're doing a pre-feasibility or feasibility, and you really don't need to build out a corresponding schedule. You just want to enter in start and finish dates to help you, look at cash flow and resource utilization. So that method's there as well.
Okay. I think the next question was asked before the last part here, which was a difference. I noticed that the cost breakdown structure in HD and the WBS in Primavera had the same hierarchy. It's possible to determine whether you want to schedule activities at a detailed or similar level or a different level, which is going to kind of show here at the end as well.
Yeah, that's a good question. I might have quickly jumped over that during the beginning. If we look at the schedule here, in hard dollar, we're looking at essentially all my scheduled items. You can pick and choose how you want your data to be represented on the Primavera side. So right now I'm kind of scheduling all the information, scheduling all the activities. If I wanted process piping to appear as one activity, I could just roll up everything below it instead of having those 17 items. So and each item is kind of independent of the other. So for underground pipe, you might schedule that at a level 2. Process piping, you might schedule it at a level 3. Your civil work, you might just say, hey, it's civil, we know what we need to do. We don't need all the activities for excavation and embankment. So
great. Next question was, we have multiple projects throughout North and South America. Can HD calculate different labor rates based on shift arrangements and location?
Yeah. So leveraging, kind of as an example, leveraging that norms data. You might bring in your historical information, bring in what those norms, man-hours factors are. Applying a kind of a generic pipe fitter resource, but then for that specific job, let's say it's in Africa, you want to switch out that pipe fitter resource with one that's specific to that region. Well, we can easily just go to our swap resource button here up top and specify I want to switch to pipe fitter, this generic one, with my pipe fitter in Africa, and it will instantly update the estimate.
Fantastic. Okay. Next question was, I have standard shift arrangements. I currently have difficulties changing certain items to a different arrangement, say 12 hours a day. Can each detailed activity be driven by a different shift arrangement?
Yes. So what I did is I jumped into this item 6.1, and I'm looking at our cost item setup tab, and you'll notice on your screen that we can set a global default for the estimate. In this instance, the global default is working 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, and we're paying everything at standard time or scale 1. For this activity, we could change it and say it's we're working 10 hours a day, 6 days a week, and we're going to do like an 80-20 split. 80% of the time we're paying standard, and 20% of the time we're paying time and a half. So.
Awesome. Okay. And then the last one I had here on the written stuff was, what methods does HD support for bringing progress into job tracking? Excel, timesheets, etc.
So on the job tracking side, when you're measuring progress against this planned estimate, we can bring in, your quantities, man hours, equipment hours, percent complete through Excel. We can use timesheets. We can use, APIs, integrations with ERP systems like Ron mentioned, SAP, Oracle Financials, JD Edwards, through an XML import. So a lot of options out there.
Good, very good. Yeah, I really appreciate all the questions too. That makes it a lot more interesting and interactive as well. It says there's a time. It says there's only 4 minutes left. Are there any questions? Providing that the Audible works pretty well, and I hope it does right now. But is there any questions that you'd like to ask over the phone? Anybody have any questions out there? Anything we saw? Okay. I'll tell you what we're going to do too. Let me re-put up the slide that has the contact information. We'll do a couple things. One is, if you do me a favor, send me an email or Justin, and we'll go ahead and send you back the presentation with the stats in it. I believe this is also being recorded from an audio perspective, so if you ever want to share it with somebody or just go through it again, you can do that through that link, and that's you'll find that on the Hard Dollar website. Again, as far as the actual presentation itself and the slides and some of the report data in there and the study data, I'm happy to send that to you from a PowerPoint presentation. You can kind of get that information. I know it's very hard to break away and spend time on these things, so I really, really appreciate you spending a few minutes with us this month. We hope these things always get better, and I also would love to hear your feedback on the stuff you kind of like to see today, and anything horrible or anything you thought, geez, I never want to see that again, or I'd rather see something else, instead, because that's how these things get better, and we're really making an attempt to drive it to kind of make it a better process every month. So I'd like to get your feedback either direction, and again, we all appreciate you taking the time to be with us today, and hope to see you out in the next couple of weeks, because there's a lot going on with the Global Petroleum Show. I know that's coming up here in a couple of weeks, the Shutdown Turnaround Show in San Antonio or Houston? San Antonio? I think San Antonio, right? And there's something else I'm forgetting about right now off the top of my head. But anyways, we'll hope to see you out there in the next couple of weeks as well, too, in person. And please stop by and say hi if you're out at any of those things. Justin, thanks again, and everybody on the call. And then we'll see you next time.
Great, thank you.